Yes, good morning and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. It's a pleasure to be back once again, but today we are here to talk about Arsenal's poor performance against Wolverhampton Wanderers over the weekend on match day 16 as they beat up against Wolverhampton Wanderers by 2 goals to 1. Arsenal did not have a good performance. They did not score a single goal, but somehow managed to win the game by 2 goals to 1. What do I mean? Two own goals from Mosquera and the goalkeeper Sam Johnston were enough to see Arsenal cruise to a 2-1 victory. I mean, cruise is even the wrong word to use in this particular context because they scored in the 70th minute. Wolves responded with an equalizer in the 90th minute through Kodare, and then it took a 94th minute goal for them to find the winning goal. Bukayo Saka received some praises, perhaps his flowers, in praise of his performance. But for me, I thought the entire team was horrible. That performance against Wolverhampton Wanderers was the worst that I've seen Arsenal play in the season. That performance was a horrible reminder of Arsenal from last season. It was an absolute nightmare. It was shambolic. If the Premier League were permitted to take back the man of the match accolade, they would have taken it back on Saturday without giving it to anybody in that Arsenal side, despite their victory. In any case, somebody from that Wolverhampton Wanderers team could have deserved to take that accolade. But it is what it is. We won't dwell on the semantics. It was too poor a performance, particularly in that first half. You could hardly remember Arsenal creating any clear-cut chances. The manager, Mikel Arteta, who is the architect behind this Arsenal team, he himself was fuming, was furious, was displeased with watching his own team. He could not believe what was happening. Whereas in the second half, he made quick adjustments. Let's not forget what had transpired in the first half. Like I said, too passive, too slow, lack of penetrative attempts, and frustration within their own performance to the extent that they attempted passes forward that were very fruitless. In that first half, you struggle to remember clear-cut chances that they created. Of course, one fell to Gabriel Martinelli through, I think, that corner kick by Declan Rice. And I do not know, for some reason, instead of heading it into the back of the net, he decided to head it across the face of goal, and it was a missed opportunity. He had another moment fall to him, which wasn't the clearest of chances, that he sort of, fired sideways. That's maybe around the side net. And then there's a moment where Bukayo Saka lays in the cross, and Victor Gyökeres could not get to it early enough as it went across goal. Those were some of the few bright moments, close to bright moments that they had in the first half. In the second half, it was the same story. Again, too passive, too slow, lacking that cutting edge, lacking that sharpness against a team that was overly defensive, against a team that was, playing with the low block, against a team that are yet to win a single game of football in as far as this Premier League campaign is concerned. That's Wolverhampton Wanderers, bottom of the league with only 2 points. Now, one would have assumed that Arsenal would have blown them away. It couldn't have been any further from the truth. One, they did come in this particular game with the expectation that Wolves were largely going to behave that way. They are still looking to inflict damage of their first victory against any opponent they can find. When you go back to a couple of weeks ago, when they got beat by Aston Villa by 0-0, it was no fancy performance from Aston Villa. In any case, if Wolves had taken their chances in that game, they possibly could have won that game. Again, when you wind things further back beyond that, you'll find a 1-1 draw between Wolves and Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham Hotspur needing a late equalizer, I think, from Joao Paulinho to get a point out of that game. They had a good performance. They just can't win, So really, that performance from Arsenal on Saturday had flashes of 2024-2025 Premier League season. It was the same old story. Overly passive, dominant of the ball, without creating any sort of pain, without creating any, inflicting any damage on the opponent. That's what we did witness. In the second half, it took Arsenal more than an hour of game time to get their first attempt on target, and that came through Declan Rice. Declan Rice. After Arsenal had made 3 quick changes, of course, taking off Ebeleche Eze, who in that number 10 role didn't look good at any given point in that game before he was withdrawn for Martin Odegaard in a game for which Leandro Trossard, Martin Odegaard, and Mikel Merino, in places of Martin Zubimendi, Gabriel Martinelli, and Ebeleche Eze. I mean, when you watch it back, it is after the introduction of Leandro Trossard that they attempted a couple of through passes, and which were a bit successful. When you go back to the first half, there's a moment where even Martin Zubimendi gets frustrated of them knocking the ball sideways back to the defender Saliba, and then back to him, that he attempts a through ball, which was an overweight pass for Bukayo Saka. It was intended for Bukayo Saka. Couldn't get it right. And that moment in itself was in a way definitive of how Arsenal had literally behaved through that first half. Then, when Leandro Trossard comes in, he's the one person that attempted, at least successfully, to play a couple of through passes. Unfortunately for him, some of them were from deep within the left wing. The first coming, I think, to Declan Rice before he goes on to have that first attempt on target. Then another, I think, was for Miles Lewis Kelly. Then he had another for Victor Gyökeres, where he sort of loops the ball over defenders. Victor Gyökeres just sits down, brings it under his control, and has an attempt on goal. Unfortunately for him, it was a couple of inches wide, and a few other, line-breaking passes that he attempted. I mean, he was the sharpest player for the time he was on the pitch in terms of attempting those forward passes. Arsenal could not play straight through the middle. I mean, we've seen this story. We've said it all season. We said it last season. Their over-reliance on the right wing is almost sickening, to say the least. The kind of reliance that I understand that when you have a player of Bukayo Saka's quality, you ought to use that quality. You ought to rely on it. But there's an over-reliance to that. And the kind of support that Bukayo Saka gets down the right wing, whether he's playing with Ben White, whether he's playing with Urian Timber, alongside Martin Odegaard, or whichever, that same kind of support is not reflected down the left wing, for the left winger who is playing in that position at any given one time. So it becomes less effective for that wing. Then, in any case, again, go back to to the 2 goals that they got. Despite them being own goals, they were a result of that right wing. Bukayo Saka floating in the corner kick, which the goalkeeper gets his fingertips to it, but not enough to change the direction of the ball before it hits the inside of the upright and bounces off his behind shoulder to hit the back of the net to give Arsenal the lead. And then the second goal, it's again a cross from Bukayo Saka. Gabriel Jesus, who takes a header to it before it's deflected by Mosquera to hit the back of the net. Again, same story. Now, when Arsenal got that 1-0 lead, again, I thought it was going to be an advantage that Wolves were now going to open up a little more, having played with 10 men behind the ball, that in their attempt to try and find an equalizer, they would, commit a couple of numbers forward. And they did that. But guess what happened with Arsenal? Like I said, a reminder of the poor performances from last season, which accosted them points with so many draws. Last season, Arsenal were the team that lost the most amount of points from a winning position. Why? Because whenever they went into a lead, for some reason, they had convinced themselves to think that they can hold on to that marginal lead, whether it was 1-0, whether it was 2-1, that they would see out, a result through that kind of performance. How? By retaining the ball and, maybe trying to frustrate the opponent, trying to do game management. It worked against them in games like Brighton. You remember when Declan Rice was sent off in that game, it ended 1-1. You remember the game against Manchester City. Yes, they were down to 10 men when Leandro Trossard is given a red card at the Etihad Stadium. You remember against Everton. You remember against Liverpool. You remember against Bournemouth at home when they lost by 2-1. Declan Rice scores that goal, and then suddenly they take their foot off the gas and eventually lose that game. So we saw that movie last season. So just on Saturday, it was a reincarnation of that. You take the lead, you try to do game management. Now, unfortunately for Arsenal, I do not know who persuaded them into doing that and to the extent that Mikel Arteta, he himself was furious with the team. They wanted to do a lot of that game management within their own half. That's the worst mistake you can do. There's a moment in there of about 3-4 minutes where Arsenal just lost it literally. One, they're playing so many blind passes. Two, they seem to lack cohesion. Even before the ball is sort of floated into the box for Al Kodari to get his header to it, you wonder what Bukayo Saka was doing. You wonder why Martin Odegaard could not, try to force a block, to go in for a block for that moment. They literally, for a moment, stood still, and you're thinking to yourself, what on God's green earth are you thinking here? So they made defensive mistakes that you cannot afford to do at that kind of stage, at that kind of level, because it's a game of fine margins. You give an opponent the slightest of chances, and you're going to drop points. So it did appear that they were going to, drop points. Now, of course, for you to push for a Premier League title, you're going to need some luck. And Saturday couldn't have come any luckier for Arsenal, because in the 4th minute, like I said, of added time, that's when they get the winning goal. Even though they won, even though they had scored that goal, you could see during the course of celebrations, Declan Rice was still furious with his teammates. I think trying to say, almost as if trying to say, we do not even need to celebrate, because we've been poor. As he walked off the pitch at the end of the final whistle, you could see him walking, I think, past Gabriel Magalhaes, who tried to cheer him up in celebration. But he wasn't having it because he knew they had a very, very poor performance of the day. So with all the quality they have in that squad, I still do not know why they cannot play fast enough. Because the moment you're too slow is you give the opponent that ample time to reorganize, to reassemble. And for you to break down teams that play with the low block, you need disruptive passes, but you need to be fast, because you need that half a second to get the better of your opponent. That you need that half space, that half a second earlier, to see that space between the bodies and the site of goal for you to make an attempt for it from distance. They were not doing that. Now, I understand that majority of teams play against Arsenal, particularly in the Premier League, with the low block, and they come with that mindset. I mean, they pick it from Manchester City, because when Man City came to the Emirates Stadium, they did the same thing, played with the low block, were defensive for the first time in Pep Guardiola's career. He did not, of course, want to lose a game. He deployed that sort of, you'd want to call it a primitive strategy, but it is still a strategy to win your points, or to get you a decent result. And they almost got a win with that, had it not been for the late equalizer from Gabriel Martinelli. And even that, the points were still shared at the end of the day. So most of the teams, we've seen it against Brentford, we've seen it against West Ham, we've seen it against Burnley, we saw it against Wolverhampton Wanderers, and many other opponents, with the exception of maybe Liverpool, Aston Villa, maybe Leeds United, and Nottingham Forest, because that Nottingham Forest came just in time after the swap of Nuno Espirito Santo for Ange Postecoglou. And even Tottenham did it, even though they were able to score multiple goals against Tottenham Hotspurs. And we've seen Arsenal struggle through that and find ways to win. But against Wolves, it almost felt like it was never going to happen for them, really, because they lacked that cutting edge, they lacked that sharpness, and that's why they signed players like Ebelecha Eze. That's why they signed players like Noni Madueke. Never mind that he never came on. And by the way, what was Mikel Arteta thinking? First of all, you've just sort of had Ben White back. He's played 3 consecutive games. He's back from a bit of a lengthy injury. You do not need to accost him. And he ended up with a hamstring. So he's going to be out for a period of almost, I would want to believe, no less than 3 weeks or even 4 weeks. We do not know what the definitive timeline will be. But that hamstring, I mean, he had the option of playing Uran Timber at right back, Mazlou Skeri at left back, Pierre Hincapié at the left-footed side of centre back, alongside William Saliba, and he decided to go otherwise. I mean, put Hincapié at left back, put William Saliba at the left side of the back line, and and Uran Timber in there, and it did not work in their favor. Now, one would wonder, how is that a point for a game where Arsenal were dominating play? I mean, even if you're dominating play, their build-up is as important as any phase of the attack. So I had nightmares watching that game. We saw a very indecisive Arsenal. We saw a team dominant with the ball without using anything for it. And they will need to cut out all that nonsense, all those mistakes, if they are going to have a shot at the Premier League title. But at the end of the day, it's the victory that matters. They were lucky to get away with that one. On another given day, maybe the story would have been very, very different. But the one thing I was happy about was that even Mikel Arteta was furious with the performance of his own team. He was not having it. I do not know who tells Arsenal that once you go into that 1-0 lead, then you decide to be passive. You decide to sort of be wasteful, not to show intent, not to show sharpness, to kill off teams. That's what Man City does. They go for the jugular. Arsenal do not do that. And they will need to do that sooner rather than later. In their next upcoming 5 fixtures in the Premier League, against Everton, against Brighton, against Aston Villa, against Bournemouth, and against Liverpool. These are teams during which last season, in home and away fixtures, that's a collection of 10 games, they only won 1 game, and that was away to Aston Villa. This season, they've already lost away to Villa Park by 2-1. All the other 9 ended, 2 of them, I think, ended in defeat. That's losing to Bournemouth, home and away by 2-0 and by 2-1. And all the others ended in draws. Against Brighton, it was a home and away draw. Against Everton, same story. Against Liverpool, home and away draw, 2-2 draw, So, and a 2-2 draw between them and Aston Villa at the Emirates Stadium. Now, if they are to win the Premier League title this season, they need to convert those draws into victories. They need to convert those into victories, because I keep saying, if Arsenal had won 5 of their 14 or perhaps 6 of their 14 draws from last season, then we would be having a whole different conversation about them from last season, because that would have gotten them the Premier League title, So they need to be intentional at cutting out the things that cost them the Premier League title last season. Do let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section, and whether you agree or disagree with that submission. Thank you, and stay blessed for now.